we're not going to win the battle on the regulatory front. We're just not. The only place we're going to win the battle is if we demonstrate that there's a better way to do capitalism.
This month on Ethical Exits, we sit down with Jim Black, co-founder of Impact GC, a Board of B Corp law firm built from the ground up to serve mission-driven businesses. Jim shares how growing up watching his mother fight for the rights of children with disabilities in public schools shaped his journey through big law and back to purpose. With Jim, we dive into the hard truths of selling your business ethically, why values must be protected in a transaction, and how mission-driven founders can flip the script, becoming buyers, not just sellers. I think you're really going to love this conversation, and you'll come away with a much clearer understanding of what you can and cannot protect legally, even as a B Corp, when planning an ethical transition. Let's dive in. So today we are so psyched to welcome Jim Black, a co-founder and managing partner of Impact GC. Jim brings over 2 decades of legal expertise to the table, having advised a diverse range of companies from startups to Fortune 500s on mergers and acquisitions, corporate governance, and strategic growth. What sets Jim apart is his unwavering commitment to aligning legal practice with purpose. At Impact GC, he provides fractional general counsel services tailored for mission-driven businesses, including B Corps, benefit corporations, and nonprofits. Jim is a passionate advocate for employee ownership, viewing it as a powerful tool for founder exits and sustainable business models. When he's not guiding clients through complex legal landscapes, Jim is actively engaged in impact business community, sharing insights and fostering collaborations that drive positive change. So Jim, we're excited to have you on Ethical Exits. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that very kind introduction.
Of course. So we'll just start things off, but we always like to start with this question because it really sets the tone for the rest of the conversation. So we want to know what values guide you most deeply and how have they shaped the way you approach business and life. So we'd love to hear not just what you do, but why you do it. How have your core values influenced the work you've taken on, including your decision to found Impact GC Law?
Yeah. So I appreciate the question because it's really kind of, foundational to what Impact GC is all about, why we formed the firm. I had a very traditional corporate law upbringing, so to speak, and, worked at big law firms, became a partner at one of the biggest law firms, was a corporate M&A capital markets practitioner, and really kind of saw all the, the good and the bad of that work environment. And, you obviously see a lot of really interesting deals and companies. And I worked in Europe for about 10 years. So there's, a lot of interesting opportunities that come through that sort of career path. And then I decided to go in-house and became chief legal and compliance officer of a publicly traded tech company. Did that for about 3 years. And all of this was very interesting and very educational to see, lots of different companies, lots of different types of deals, different jurisdictions, a lot of cross-border work and things like that. But there was always something missing for me, and that was why we're working 3,000 hours a year, right? What is it that we're trying to accomplish here? And, I did some deals that I felt good about, and I did some deals that I didn't feel so good about. But, that kind of work environment is one where doing the deal is what matters, right? And getting paid for the deal is what matters. And, I felt like there were many years where I was working very hard and not making any positive difference through my work. I have 2 kids and, always was very invested in trying to raise them with good values and to be good citizens of the world, and, to be very open and, accepting of other people. And so that was kind of where I focused a lot of my, sort of personal values. But I always felt like I was missing half the equation because my professional life was not in tune with sort of what I felt was correct and, and valuable. And, I've been following since I was a very young associate this sort of debate over what capitalism is all about. What is, who's it meant to benefit? Why do we have corporations? Why do we as a society create this structure, which is not a natural structure? It's a human made structure. Always felt, even when I was a very young lawyer and really didn't know what I was doing, I always felt this argument in favor of shareholder primacy was just wrong. I thought this can't be the sole purpose of corporations. This can't be the sole function of capitalism to enrich, capital givers and capital owners. There's so many more people who are affected by all these things that we're doing. There must be a broader lens that we can bring to this. And back in the 90s, when I was starting out, the term stakeholder wasn't really that widely used. And so there was sort of shareholder primacy or something different. But what that something different wasn't very well defined. This is pre-B Corp movement. This is, sort of before there was truly a structure and a set of concepts that you could enunciate what the alternative to shareholder primacy is, right? How a stakeholder kind of focused economy could work. And so, I was always very interested in the B Corp movement. And when I left my company where I was general counsel, I kind of took a step back and said, okay, I think I probably have a decade left in my career. And I want it to be meaningful, right? And, you can't get that time back. And so the idea of creating a law firm, but a very different kind of law firm, kind of came to the forefront. And speaking with my co-founder, she and I have worked together for many, many years in different places. And she was very focused on sort of building her practice, representing women-owned businesses and women entrepreneurs. And we realized that what we were thinking about and talking about was very much the same thing, which was creating a law practice that would support people who are many times underserved in the economy, support companies that are underserved on the legal front because they just can't find lawyers who understand their values, who can understand why they do what they do, why they exist, as the business that they are. Legal services are very expensive and sort of not truly accessible to a lot of people. And so one of the things we realized very early on was there are many, many companies in the mission-driven business community or movement that just don't get good legal support. And they don't get good legal support, one, because they feel they can't afford it. They may have gone to a big firm once or twice with a question, and the advice they got was okay, but not great, and it wasn't tailored to them specifically, and it was very expensive. And so, a lot of the companies that we encounter in this space simply don't get the support they would benefit from, and that's really a rate limiting factor for companies' growth when they're not getting good legal support. We really are a facilitator. We're a support service. Where the magic happens is in the company and in the creativity and in the business ideas, but we help to grease the wheels to make that, the business move forward and to limit risk and to help companies seize opportunities. So this is a long-winded way of answering your question, Caitlin, but it really was kind of a sense of wanting to do something meaningful with the almost 30 years of experience that I'd gathered. And I felt like I have useful skills. I've seen a lot and done a lot. And it's unusual for people who have had the career path that I've had or that my co-founders had be truly available to small and mid-sized companies, especially mission-driven companies. And so that's what we wanted to do, was create a law firm that would bring very high quality legal services at very accessible, affordable rates with a huge amount of flexibility and on a values aligned basis. And so that's where we kind of came up with the idea of Impact GC. We are a pending B Corp ourselves. We're planning to certify this summer. We're a 1% for the Planet member. We do a lot of pro bono work. And so we feel like, being having an approach to business that's very similar to that of our clients is a positive value, and it allows them to be very comfortable with working with us. And and there are some issues that are specific to B Corps and benefit corporations that not every general corporate lawyer knows, right? There are things around the statutes of how to become a benefit corporation, how to comply with the requirements. What does your annual benefit report say? How does that look, right? How do you manage fiduciary duties in a benefit corporation or in a B Corp? And so there is some specialized knowledge, but it's also really just the fundamental approach.
Giving a shit. I mean, if I could put it that way, and that was, I think, the way you explained your career transition is echoed in all the rooms that you hang out in now. Mm-hmm. Like all the people that you're meeting through this movement, and Caitlin and I have the same experience. It's like we all kind of got thrown into the river, and we found ourselves downstream, and we're like, wait, how did I end up here? This is not where I wanted to be. Right. But my journey, I've learned all these things, and I want to put this stuff to good use. And I thought that your story that you told me when we first met, Jim, about your mother was really impactful. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that with our audience, because I think that is kind of like the genesis, right? Like this is your lived experience to want to do more than just to enrich yourself, right? Yeah. And put yourself in a gated community with your kids and send them up to private school, right? That was never the objective. That's where you got to that point where you could do that. You could provide that kind of life for your family. But there was always this yearning, and I think it started with the modeling of your mother. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that with us.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. I'd forgotten that we'd spoken about that. But so my mother's story is really interesting. I think so, at least. So she was a school teacher originally. She grew up in New York. In Queens, and in a family of modest means, and went to college in New York, became a school teacher, met my dad. He also grew up in very, very humble circumstances in Brooklyn during the Depression, and they started building life together. And my mother was a very, very smart person, a very strong personality. And, she took a few years off to have my two older sisters and me. But it was clear that she wanted to do more with her life. And as much as she was a wonderful mother and very nurturing and very devoted, she also knew she had more to give to the world. And so when I was very young, she went back to grad school to become a speech pathologist and audiologist. And through that, she started working with a lot of children in schools and public schools that had various developmental disabilities and other conditions. And she just realized that she loved working with this population. She loved these children. She saw so much potential in them that a lot of other people didn't see. And so then she transitioned into being a paralegal advocate for a state agency in Illinois, where I grew up. And the state agency's mandate was to advocate for these children to get them proper educational programs in public schools. And back then, and it may not be very different now, but certainly back in the 80s and 90s, children who had learning disabilities or developmental disabilities or behavioral issues, they were typically just put in a room and told to sit there. Yeah. They were simply taken out of the educational environment in public schools, and they were not given. Absolutely. They were separated. They weren't given any of the support services that they needed, and their potential was completely wasted. And their life trajectory was affected by the fact that the schools just decided not to educate them. And so my mother was very passionate about this and about helping these kids. And after working as a paralegal advocate for a number of years, she was frustrated because she couldn't herself go to court on behalf of these kids. She was a paralegal. The state lawyers who were responsible for doing that had varying degrees of devotion to the job, maybe as a diplomatic way of putting it. And so she decided to go back to law school, and she went to law school at age 50. She was actually in law school with my older sister at the same time, which my older sister kind of hated, but also kind of loved. And she graduated law school, my mother did, and just hung out her own shingle and started her own practice, only really exclusively devoted to working with families that had children who had special needs, who were not getting their needs met in the public schools. And for her, this was a civil rights issue, right?
Yeah.
This was her personal crusade on behalf of these children, and the families and the parents, to get them the education that they were entitled to. And there's federal statute that entitles children to a free, appropriate public education, and these kids weren't getting it. And so she built this practice and, paid no attention whatsoever to the business side of it. She didn't have any interest in running a law firm. She just wanted to help these kids and go to court. And when I was in college, I went to college in my hometown and was there through this whole period when she was, starting her firm and getting out of law school. And I started working with her, and I just thought it was incredibly inspiring.
Yeah.
It showed me the power of the law and the power of the law in the hands of people who want to do good things with it. And that was really the reason that I ended up going to law school, with, all these highfalutin notions of becoming a civil rights lawyer, and then, graduating with 6 figures of debt and saying, well, I'm not sure I can pay back loans with 6 figures of debt and start a family at the same time. And, so as you said, Hannah, you kind of jump in the river and it takes you somewhere, and you realize somewhere, at some point you reached a point that you never intended to go to.
Yeah.
So I had a long career in big law, and then in-house. As I said, great education, but it wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't the kind of tribute to my mother's legacy that I intended my legal career to be. And so that was a part of why I decided to refocus and say, okay, I want to do something meaningful with the last decade or so of my career.
Did you know that mission-driven companies are 63% more likely to outperform their peers in times of market volatility? At Up & Over, we specialize in buy-side M&A sourcing for companies like yours, focused on purpose, impact, and growth. Our goal is simple: to help you scale through strategic acquisitions that align with your values and fuel positive change. Ready to take your business further? Visit upandoveradvisors.com to learn more.
That's so cool. I love that story. And I think that I'm really glad that you shared it with us, because I think that's what really makes you real, right? And it makes your story so unique. And I think you could definitely see it as you're applying it now. So thanks for sharing that. I thought that was really cool. I want to make sure that we got there. And kudos to your mom. I mean, what an amazing woman, who just was like, well, if no one else is going to do this, I'll just do it myself,
Exactly.
And how many lives have been changed by her and by folks like her? So cool.
Yeah, it was really amazing. And she passed a while ago, but the number of people who came out of the woodwork to her memorial service that we'd never met, we had no idea who these people were, and they came up and they'd hug us and say, your mom got me an education. Your mom got my child sent to the school that we needed, and it was incredibly moving to see. Wow, she changed people's lives. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, thank you for sharing that story, Jim. That was really, really beautiful. I too, actually, my mother was, just to share something similar, my mother was the public defender of New Jersey, and she had made it her mission specifically to work with a division of the New Jersey department called DIFUS, where she helped I would say like underrepresented families, specifically protecting parents' rights in child removal cases. So she always, had this vision and believed deeply that poverty shouldn't be confused with neglect.
Yes.
So
Amazing.
now they've changed the name of that department. It's named something else now, but it has definitely evolved to be a lot more robust and equitable for those types of individuals who are not represented. So
that's amazing. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. Look at women doing incredible things. So that really resonated with me. Thank you. But yeah, so, you were talking about how, you've worked, this was like your career path and all of these, things that happened to you along the way, and your mom's really incredible, inspiring story, and how that shaped who you are and this firm that you've built, that has helped so many people. I've also saw that on your website that you mentioned that you do a lot of work with the Innocence Project, which I understand is exonerating wrongfully convicted individuals, like through DNA testing, and the LGBTQ advocacy that you also are really passionate about. And how has that shaped your approach to client relationships and like what kind of businesses that you choose to support?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the Innocence Project work is it's devastating, to be honest, because what you do is, as kind of a line attorney volunteering for that, is you review police files and case files to see if you can find any thread that you can possibly pull on to unravel, a conviction that appears to be a wrongful conviction. And the reality is, having looked at many of those case files, it's very hard. For all of the, for every case that you read about in the press where somebody's freed from prison after, years of being wrongfully incarcerated, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of other cases that the Innocence Project or other people look at, and you can't find that thread. You can't find, the misplaced sample of of evidence or whatever. And even though I'm convinced, partly through that work and partly just from kind of my overall perception of how the criminal justice system works, that there are many, many innocent people sitting in jail today. And yet it's very hard to find those cases where, there's enough evidence of prosecutorial misconduct or something else that you can actually get somebody exonerated. So as much as I love doing that work, it was also it's very sad, because you realize how helpless a lot of people are who are in prison and desperately want somebody to hear their story. And the reality is it's too late a lot of times once they've not had good defense counsel. And you read some of these stories, it's heartbreaking, of, their counsel sleeping through the trial, literally sleeping through the trial, and a judge not finding that to be, inadequate supportive counsel. And you think, how can somebody be convicted when the court appointed defense attorney just didn't call a single witness and slept through trial? Like, how can that constitute, adequate
due process,
constitutionally adequate due process and defense? But that's the way the system works. So that work, I'm not currently doing it. I'd like to pick it up again. But the Innocence Project work is, it's very important, and it's very difficult to see those stories and to know maybe not everyone that you look at, every case that you look at, but some of those people are wrongly in prison, and there's not much you can do about it once they're already there. The work that is, I think, maybe more joyful is the work that I've done with Human Rights Campaign. I've been a member of HRC for probably coming on to 20 years now, and was really happy. An old friend of mine became General Counsel of HRC a number of years ago and reached out, and so I started doing pro bono work, and that was great because I've always felt very strongly. I had I grew up in the 80s, and in the dawn of HIV, and lost both close friends and family members, and it was very clear back then that one of the reasons we lost so many people back then was because of government neglect and bigotry, right?
Right.
If you look at the Reagan administration, the government intentionally did nothing, intentionally denied that it was a true health crisis, and, failed to implement any public health measures that they could have done simply because they didn't care about the people who were dying. And so that's always been an issue that's very close to my heart. And so HRC, I think, is a great organization. There's many other great organizations out there, but that's always been one of the groups that I really enjoy doing pro bono work for, just because I think it's a very important issue and an important organization.
And for the folks that don't know what HRC is, can you let us know what that stands for?
Yeah, it's called Human Rights Campaign. It's one of the, I don't know if it's the oldest, but it's it's one of the older LGBTQ plus advocacy organizations, very influential in Washington, and just a very, to me, a great organization. As I said, I know there's lots of other ones out there as well, but it's a very active organization that advocates very strongly for LGBTQ plus rights.
It's incredible. Well, thank you being a voice for all those, who don't have the representation, especially, you being the space that you're in. It's great to see folks like yourself doing that kind for others. So, Hannah and I appreciate that. But I know that we also were talking about, what Hannah and I do from like a day-to-day business, and how that complements what you do at Impact. So we were just thinking, maybe we can like pivot a little bit here because we're having great conversation, but, it would just, put a little pep in our step. We are really passionate about leveraging M&A, right? And when Hannah had, started Up and Over Advisors, her goal was to demystify this space, make it more approachable, and really empower entrepreneurs to feel like, they too could acquire a business. The only way out wasn't to sell to, these corporate conglomerates, right? So when it comes to acquisitions and using it as a force for good, you have been practicing law in the space for many, many years now. Can you talk to us and to our listeners about, the role that you have in this process, and when and why do you get involved, and how do you think you can position, yourself uniquely as an entrepreneur, for the advancement of mission-driven companies, seeking this growth type lever?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I love Up and Over Advisors. I think it's such an amazing idea. And, I actually have a referral for you.
Oh, excellent. We'll pay you for that,
But,
Jim.
so my primary training as a lawyer was as an M&A lawyer coming up.
Yeah.
And so I've done, M&A of every type and every size. I've done $1 billion deals. I've done, $1 million deals and everything in between. And the one thing that is very clear to me is many, many, many deals get done and the seller regrets the deal a year or two later.
Yeah.
For a whole variety of reasons. And it's usually not because they didn't get enough money out of the deal. It's usually because they don't like what happened to their company. And so, I've seen this, I practiced in Germany for about a decade, and Germany has a very strong family ownership tradition of businesses. There are all these mid-sized Mittelstand companies, which are wonderful companies, very successful, that have been family owned for generation. And what has happened in recent years is there hasn't been a natural successor in the family. And so more and more of those businesses have gone on the blocks and been sold. And what I realized through doing that work with a lot of those types of businesses is, and this was sort of before I had sort of a real consciousness of the B Corp movement, is that they viewed their workforce as family, as an extension of their family. And so, it would be on the sell side, it would be an absolutely core part of the deal to get whatever assurance we could get that the workforce would be protected. And that the practices and the benefits and the things that the family had put in place over many years, and many of their employees were multi-generational employees, right? They're the great grandfather of, worker, A, that started working there 110 years ago, and they just, it's a major employer in their town. And, and it's just it's amazing to see how a company, even though it's a for-profit company, can be a pillar of a community and an anchor that, supports generations and generations of families. And, there were a number of those deals that I did where, the only buyer that was really viable was a private equity fund. And those private equity fund buyers would make assurances, but they wouldn't put it in a purchase agreement. And they'd change things, and they'd downsize, and they'd close plants. And, the amount of regret that I saw among some of the selling families was massive. And I realized, there needs to be a better structure. And that's one of the challenges with M&A is, you can have certain things in a purchase agreement about what's going to happen with the employees, but the employees are not a party to that agreement. They can't enforce it, right? And so typically what you get is some assurance of, for the 6 months following the closing, there will be no layoffs, greater than, or outside of performance issues or something. But you really don't get much more protection than that. And even that is, again, not enforceable by the employees. So if the buyer decides to renege on that, I mean, the seller could try to enforce that part of the contract, but they typically don't, right? Because they're kind of out of the picture. So what you see is, a lot of regret, a lot of transactions that get done where nice words are exchanged in the negotiating room and then forgotten the moment, the moment the ink dries. And so, for me, coming into this mission-driven business community and thinking about how does M&A work, or how can M&A work in this world, it's a very interesting challenge and a bit of a conundrum. And the thing, and one of the reasons that I love your firm is the most important factor is finding the right buyer. Right. And finding the right buyer with the right values who actually supports what the company that's being sold is trying to do and wants to perpetuate those things. And the traditional, as both of you know, the traditional kind of M&A sales process is you put together a offering memo, PPM or whatever. You go out to the market and you try to get as many, bids as possible. And then you maybe have a competitive auction process, and whoever puts the most money on the table at the end wins. And, and that ends up being a very empty process for sellers.
Right. I mean, Jim, can we be surprised by that though? If a process starts with numbers, it's going to end with numbers. Right. And if you really make a decision based on the highest multiple, then that acquiring company is going to be under the gun to make money from that purchase. Right. So of course, then all these other ethereal things, all these other, I'm going to use the word soft, even though that's just an easy way to describe it. Those become cost centers. Right. And so your fastest way back to profitability is, of course, to eliminate as many of those as possible. And what's interesting, and where I think that we really, also when we first met, we really aligned on this, M&A is where the B Corp movement started. That was where it came out of, is because of failed transaction with And One, right? Where everything that actually made that company great was completely removed by the acquiring company. And guess what? Then the company went away. We don't even hear about this company. They were second to Nike in basketball shoes for a while, right? At the height of their company trajectory. So, I mean, it's it's interesting because it's of course it's going to end up that way, right? But how do we move away from that, where I can't go to the grocery store, Jim, nor can you, and buy eggs with my values. The only way I can go to the grocery store and buy eggs is with hard cold cash, right? So how do we, and of course, for the founders, of course, the financials are going to matter, right? But how do we? And this is what I was really curious about, and where I really wanted to have an attorney on our podcast. It's okay, so if it matters about all these other promises, how do you really make that legally binding? How, if you're a B Corp, do you protect that during a transaction? And how do you specifically position them for that? Or if they're not a B Corp, how do they protect it? Right? Because I believe that there's differences there, and that's why the B Corp certification exists.
Yeah, it's a really hard question, unfortunately. And so, the one ironclad option is to create a trust, right? And so that's why that's kind of where the employee ownership model comes into play to some extent, because this, perpetual purpose trust or employee ownership trust model, that's the one singular model
Yeah.
in the market where you can truly lock in the mission and have it be untouchable going forward. The challenge with that is, if you create that trust, that works very well if you're selling to your employees, if that's the right kind of transaction for you, right? If you're doing an employee ownership trust, that is the model itself, right? And that works fine. If you're selling to a strategic or a financial buyer, the trust isn't that useful a structure necessarily, right? Now, especially if you're selling the whole company. What you could sell part of the company and put the rest of the company in a trust, and that would protect it. And, you could have governance rights that would, permit or prohibit the buyer of a part of the company from changing that.
Okay.
But that's not a typical M&A structure, right? To go out and say, we're selling 48% of our company and the rest is going into a trust. I mean, you'd need a really particular buyer to say, okay, that sounds good.
Right. Right. Or it'd be like separate asset sale, right? It'd be like they're shipping off a portion of the company that's really clean cut, and they can cut it off.
Right. And you could do that, certainly. And, then, that part that you've sold, the buyer will do what they want with it.
Right.
It's just, there aren't good legal structures, at least not that I'm aware of, that you can lock in a company's mission, even if it's a public benefit corporation, right? Because that can be changed. And, typically if you're selling all of the company, the buyer can literally amend the articles overnight and get rid of the benefit corporation status. And there's no requirement to keep a B Corp certification alive, right? And, even between recertifications, there's a 3-year period where, you're you have the certification, you can kind of keep it, but you're not actually having to certify too much, right? And so it's a real challenge, and that's why the only true assurance that I am aware of for preserving a company's mission is finding a buyer who wants to do that themselves, right? Who is actually committed to that and who understands the value of that. And that's part of the challenge. And one of the interesting things here at the Mo Summit is, a lot of the discussion is around the actual commercial value of being a mission-driven business, not doing business in this manner for altruistic reasons. It's not philanthropy
as a strategy,
but that it's a strategy, right? And there are positive financial returns associated with conducting your business in an ethical way, in a sustainable way, whether that's employee retention or it's market differentiation or other things. That is, the pitch isn't just, well, this is a great thing, right? This is a nice way to do business, but this is actually the cornerstone of the success of this company, that it is a mission-driven business, that it is a B Corp, or it is a benefit corporation. And if you as a buyer change that, you're going to be destroying part of the value. Sort of like you said with Ad One, a buyer has to really understand what the value drivers of a business are in order to be successful with that acquisition. And with this type of company, with a mission-driven company, one of the core value drivers is that mission. And I think that's an important thing, to make sure that you have a buyer that truly understands that.
Well, that's what I think is really interesting about, and we talked about this a little bit before, and Caitlin and I have certainly talked about this a lot, is the when you talk about M&A with mission-driven companies, typically their first thought is, well, I have to be the seller. I can't be the acquirer, right? And so when I think about what you just said, that there has to be ideological buy-in, sure, or they just have to get the value, the real cold, hard capitalistic value of being a sustainable, values-driven brand. And we've seen that time and time again, right, where that's just simply true. right?
Hmm.
It's been proven over and over that if you lead by values, if you're a sustainable company, if there's more to you than what you sell, if there's a reason behind it. I mean, we've seen this with Liquid Death, we've seen this with Who Gives a Crap, we've seen this with Patagonia, Cotopaxi, Warby Parker, all these companies, right?
Yeah.
They especially when it's plain to see when they're selling a basic commodity. Water is perfect. It is water. There is nothing different about water from water, right? Unless it has gas in it, right? Cold gas. But Liquid Death put it in a aluminum can, and they rebranded it, and their whole thing was about that, right?
Yeah.
And you can see the difference because they went off like a rocket ship, whereas name a water company that's had that kind of growth in the same category. None. So what's the difference? Well, it's the difference of how they went to market, right? And what they represent that people are really aligned with. But if you're a mission-driven company and you already get that, then when you acquire a company, whether it's another mission-driven company or maybe it's just your traditional company, and you disrupt them, right? If there's even if there's the trust or no trust, right? No other structures built in, no EO structure, but you just get that and you infuse your values into that next company. That is where we have growth in this model, right? We have much more control over it if we are, and I hate to use this word aggressor, but it kind of is. Like you're proactive, you're taking action. And there's so many different ways, from a capitalization side of it, right? There's so many different ways that you can capitalize an acquisition. There's so many interesting pathways out there, right? You don't have to have all the cash. You just, have to have a good business where you're making some money and you can take on some debt equity, right? So what are your thoughts on that? As far as that approach and shifting the aperture a little bit, if you really want to drive these values forward, and certainly, and I think you're the one who said this to me, which really changed my perspective. It's like, I've never thought of it that way. If you're a mission-driven company and you want to maybe sell your company to your employees at any point while you're running that company, growth enables a better legacy, a better sale, a better entity for your employees to eventually take over.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That should be part of the strategy.
Yeah, it's super interesting that you say that. I totally agree, and I think you're right. I think some mission-driven companies think that M&A or being an acquirer is like a dirty word.
Yes, dude, you are Darth Vader. Yes.
Yeah, and it's a very, and I think that's simply because they've heard the horror stories about companies that were acquired, and things changed for the worse. But I totally agree that it's a strategy that more mission-driven companies should think about to try to look at their own market and say, executive coaching. There's so many great executive coaches out there, and they're 1 or 2 person firms, and their growth potential is nil, right? They're maxed out. There's no way they can grow.
They're a service company. Yes.
Right. But if you roll 10 of those up, suddenly you have a completely different critical mass where you can also work with a different category of client, and you can bring more people in. You have the resources to train people. You can rationalize the sort of admin side of it. And then you have a very different growth trajectory for those businesses on a combined basis. And that's actually one of the conversations I had with one of my clients here just yesterday was exactly that. How do I find the small shops in my industry, preferably B Corps, preferably mission driven, but not exclusively? And how do I develop an acquisition strategy to bring on those companies onto our platform and to grow inorganically, but in a very purposeful way and in a way that is very consistent with the mission of the company as a B Corp. And I said, I think that you're onto the right track, because there are certainly a lot of resource-starved B Corps out there and mission-driven companies out there that they don't want to take on debt. They have the founder still owns the company. They've worked really hard. They've built something of value, but there's just a cap on their growth. And they don't have access to external financing, or they don't want to take it on.
Right.
And the only real way for them to grow is to combine forces with others. And so finding those opportunities, I think it's a really interesting strategy. And as you said, as we talked about, when we talked last time, the building something of greater value
Yes.
makes your exit that much better, right?
Yes.
And whether that's an exit to another mission-driven company or it's to your employees, you're increasing your legacy, you're increasing your impact by growing your business in a sort of values led way.
Yes.
So I totally agree. I think it's something that more companies in the space need to think about seriously.
Yeah, and I get why they don't. I mean, it's very obvious, and it is scary, and there's a lot of unknowns, and they don't know where to turn, where they can actually trust that entity, and they do need support through this process, right?
Yeah.
So the role that you provided is super critical, and I think you also said to me, you've had a couple good zingers, Jim. I think you also said no margin, no mission,
Mm-hmm.
right? So. And Stacy Smith from Project Equity, she taught us this too. She's like, you cannot sell your company to your employees unless you're profitable.
Absolutely.
Right? Like that is one of the big check marks. So how do you get to profitability? And for a lot of small companies, organic growth is so challenging. Right.
Yeah.
And there's, and like I was saying to Caitlin the other day, there's no scale fast. There's only scale smart. We've seen people where acquisition strategies are a disaster. They grow too fast. They don't know how to operate. Right. And it is the poison pill to their business.
Yeah.
Right. Slow and steady, smart acquisition strategy can be a very viable path to growth, and growth that can enable mission, can accelerate mission achievement, and can create, as you taught me, a better entity for that eventual, perhaps, then you sell internally.
Right.
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 And I do think, we're talking about ethical exits. What is an ethical exit? What does that look like? How is that composed? There are, as you mentioned, there are so many examples where exits have gone wrong, and I think you're 100% accurate. It's never, maybe there was a little, like, maybe I left a little bit on the table, financially, but for the most part, it's like, oh no, all the people that I've loved and cared for and have spent a lot of years and a lot of time building for me, they got the shoe as soon as I left, or things went downhill, or they lost a lot of their job satisfaction. That's the thing that you regret, right? The most. So looking at that is, I don't know if there's a better model on planet, right? Unless you do sell to somebody who's completely in line and you trust them, right? Because you've said, which is kind of heartbreaking, that there's very little you can do. And trust is permanent, like what Patagonia has put in place, right? That's an option, and that's non-transferable, right? Once it's in place, like it's in place, which is great. But outside of that, I think it's selling to your staff. So how do you get to a place where that's even possible? Yeah. And that's through growth. That's through profitability.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things, I mean, if you think about sort of how an employee ownership exit works, it's basically an earn-out model, right?
Yeah.
I mean, typically it's majority financed by the seller.
Yes.
And as you're saying, if the company is not throwing off enough cash to amortize that loan, there are sellers who have the financial wherewithal to be flexible and to defer and, even to, at some point waive part of the financing. But that's the exception, right? For most founders that are exiting, this is what they built in their life and their career, and this is what their retirement is going to, be supported by. So, they really do need to have, a high degree of assurance that the company will continue to generate enough cash that they can amortize the loan. And, the other important part of that is you have to get that loan out of the way so that the money starts flowing to the employees, right? That's because that's a drain on cash generation
cash flow.
for as long as that loan is outstanding. And whether that's 5 years or 7 years. And, some people take up to 10 years to get paid out, so that, a higher proportion over time can go to the employees. But the really lucrative aspects of employee ownership start to be felt when that loan is amortized, is fully amortized.
Yes.
Right. And then people say, holy cow, we were profitable this year. I got this check. That's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. I didn't realize that that's how this is going to feel. Right. And I was speaking with, I don't know if you know Mira and Oka, who has a swim school in Florida, Oka Aquatics, that did an employee ownership trust transition about a year ago. And she said that the look on the face of her owner employees is just incredible when they realize this is actually meaningful. This is actually economically meaningful. And, you can structure these things so that, a part of the profit goes into cash payout and a part goes into people's 401k. So they're building retirement wealth, right? And things like that. And there's just so many cool things you can do with employee ownership as an exit strategy. But it only works, like you were saying, if the company's profitable.
Yeah, so not meant to be a gotcha, but just like a real reality, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it makes me think back to the effect your mother had on you, right? I mean, these transformative experiences where someone shows us another way, right? That's the power we have, really. I mean, I was reading the other day that someone was saying, like, during pandemics, we just go to work. During all this turmoil with Trump, and I guess we're becoming the next, Russia, right? We're becoming an empire. All this turmoil in the courts, all this stuff that's going on, here locally, globally, what's going on with Palestine and Israel, Ukraine and Russia war, all this stuff. Like, we just continue to go to work, right? Yeah. It's just part of who we are. It is bizarre. Like, you think about, during World War II, people were still going to work. As bombs were dropped, we crave this kind of, as humans, this kind of normalcy, and that's a big part of our adult lives. But you're in such a powerful position as an entrepreneur or as a business owner, where you can create something really meaningful at work and where everyone really benefits from it. Yeah. And the kickoff, right? The downstream butterfly effect from that, just like from your mother, right? Like how many lives she changed by showing up. You think about that. Like, you had some people approach you at her memorial, say like, oh, she's changed my life in this way and that way. That is it. That is if we can achieve that as humans, we have succeeded, right? Even to change one life or one trajectory. Financial empowerment. Like we were saying earlier, you can't buy eggs with goodwill or with your values, right? Yeah. But to empower your employees financially is something I think is really, really something to consider, and is so worthwhile, because that is kind of the foundation that can empower anything. Yeah. It really can. Yeah. Just the ability to pay off some loans. Right. Go to university, perhaps, all those things that the financial empowerment helps with, I think is really cool. And you're just changing people's perspectives on what's possible and what an employee-employer relationship can look like. That I think really provides lasting change in our culture.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, one of the things that I think has become apparent is we're really in sort of an existential struggle right now over what American capitalism looks like and what it should look like, right? We have a growing oligarchy. We have extreme inequality, wealth and income inequality. We have regulatory capture. We have extraordinary levels of corruption in our government that both legislatures, taking political donations and doing the bidding of wealthy people, and, executives and, regulators. And, we're not going to win the battle on the regulatory front. We're just not. The only place we're going to win the battle is if we demonstrate that there's a better way to do capitalism. And better for workers, better for consumers, better for the planet, better for society, better for communities. Yes. And, that's to me the power of this movement, that, there's an imperative to grow, because growing the businesses in this environment, in this community, that's what demonstrates that this is a better way to do business, right?
Yes.
That's what demonstrates that this is a viable alternative to the very corrupt, shareholder-focused, capitalism that we've had, and kind of shows that there's another way. And that kind of brings me back to one of the points you made earlier, which I think is actually really interesting and really smart. Why don't B Corps buy non-B Corps and bring them into their fold, right?
Yes.
Why don't mission-driven companies become the acquirers in the market
Yes.
of non-mission-driven companies, right?
Yes.
And why don't they convert them to
Yes.
a better way of doing business? Because organic growth can get you so far, but it can only get you so far, right? There's a limit on that. And, I'd love to see more acquisitive, mission-driven companies gobbling up competitors that are not mission-driven, and see the effect on the employees of the acquired company, see the effect on consumers, see the effect on the communities that they operate in. And then people will say, whoa, this is what this company could have been all along, but it wasn't.
Right.
But now that we're a B Corp, now that we're mission-driven, now that we have a new owner, everything's better, right? Everything's different. I think that would be a profound impact.
I agree. I completely agree, Joe. I was talking to Blake Jones of Namaste Solar. He started his company as an employee-owned cooperative. Really super cool guy. And he also is the president and founder of the Kachua Impact Fund. He does off Wall Street private investments. He helps people, retail investors invest in cool stuff, right? Really cool guy. And he was saying that it's not, capitalism isn't the issue. The issue is there's not enough capitalists. Let's sit with that for a second, right? And I think there is a lot of power in that, and shifting the narrative, because we know what we have is the best stuff, right? Like, this is the secret sauce, And if we were able to share that with more folks and disrupt that way, I think that could be really powerful and impactful. I wanted to transition just really quickly, because we are in, and we both talked about it now, like, we don't live in a vacuum, right? And there are some really powerful things going on around us, especially as it impacts the law. You talked about due process earlier with the Innocence Project. Oh my God, is that not under a threat? The President of the United States and his people, I won't use any other word for his people are currently in front of the Supreme Court arguing that they should have the power, the ultimate power, to arrest anybody, whether they're an immigrant or they're a homegrown. I have to use that word because that's how he's framed it. For any reason, without due process, and to ship them overseas. We've seen that before. It was called something different during World War II, right? Most concentration camps were outside of Germany, right? Yeah. So we've seen that. So there's large outsized pressures. Another example of that we're seeing is the rollbacks and pressure against universities and other institutions for DEI, right? Yeah. And a lot of law firms are capitulating in like really, really significant ways, where not only are they backing down, but they're offering up millions of dollars of pro bono services, right, to do this government's bidding. So just on practical terms, right, Jim, I think it's clear that you can help folks, and you are doing a lot. You've done a lot of transaction law in your lifetime. You've done it for the big guys. You want to do it for the right guys, if I can phrase it that way. You have built a practice that can meet people where they are, and you can be at a price point that people can afford and get really compatible law services. And they know, working with you, that you will put them in the best position possible to protect what really matters to them in a transaction, regardless of the side of the table they're on. But you also have experience, and you're interested in all aspects of using the law as a force for good, as your mother taught you very well. How are you thinking about that? Or how, if you are advising companies, because that is risky, right? I mean, there's Republican senators who are now on the record saying, we're afraid to speak up because the retribution is real. What do you say to mission-driven, ethical-driven companies that are trying to, again, advance people's rights and speak authentically and have policies around this stuff that's now being heavily regulated?
Yeah. It's a really hard question, and we are having a lot of those conversations with our clients. And it to some extent, I think the short answer is keep doing what you're doing, but think about how you're talking about it. Because the reality is a lot of what this administration is doing, they're attacking the window dressing, right? They're attacking the visible indicators of what they consider wokeness or whatever, ESG, DEI, right? They don't understand or care what that actually represents in a company, right? So if there's a company that is, moving toward being carbon neutral, this administration is not knowledgeable enough or deep enough in sort of that space to say, we don't want you to just stop, to take the DEI stuff off your website. We want you to stop being carbon neutral. That's not what's happening. So, I think my advice generally has been keep doing the work. Think a little bit about how you're presenting it publicly. What are you saying on your website? It's really interesting and very sad, but, I've had clients say, well, I wanted to do an equity program, but I don't want to give equity to anybody who could potentially bring a claim against me or against the company for breach of fiduciary duty, based on our, climate forward policies or our their socially progressive policies. And it's really sad that there's that level of fear among entrepreneurs and owners now to say, I'm afraid of my own shareholders, right? Because who knows what courts will do these days, right? And so to me, everything that I've heard and every conversation I've had has really been around, don't stop doing the work, even double down on the work, but just be conscious of what you're saying publicly on your website or otherwise, because making yourself a target for no good reason doesn't make sense in this environment, as long as you're still doing the important things that you're doing. And it's sad that we even have to have that conversation. But that is a bit the environment we're in right now. And to some extent, it's funny because, there are companies that have not changed a single thing they do around diversity, equity and inclusion, but they just have stopped using those words, right? But they still have the exact same policies and programs, right? And that's why my view is these attacks on DEI and ESG, they're very superficial.
Surface, yeah.
And they don't at all penetrate to the level of what companies are actually doing. And so companies have no reason to stop doing the good things that they had started to do. And certainly, some of it, you can question whether a company like Meta really cared about this stuff, or they were just doing it because in the age of Black Lives Matter, they thought this is a good way to have good publicity. There's a lot of companies that probably never really cared about this stuff. And for them, this is just a convenient excuse to stop doing what they were doing. But for mission-driven companies that truly do care about this, about the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or corporate social responsibility and the environment, there's no reason for them to not continue to do that work and to continue those policies.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Appreciate your feedback there. Well, let's look ahead into 2025 now. So we're a few months in, but I'm sure there are things that are coming up this year, maybe early next, that you're excited about, or any projects or initiatives that you feel really align with your mission, particularly when it comes to supporting like B Corps or triple bottom line businesses that you can share.
Well, one thing we're really excited about is doing our own certification this summer.
Yes.
That's the certification itself is a nice thing to put on your website, but what I really appreciate about it is it's a process
Mm-hmm.
that's allowing us to become a better company.
Yeah.
And we used the B Impact Assessment when we first formed Impact GC as sort of a blueprint for how to create the company, how to build the company. But going through it now again in detail for our certification, um, we're working with a great consultant who's done this with many companies.
Oh, cool.
It's really allowing us to think, how can we get better? How can we do this better? How can we do that better? How can we be more intentional with our vendor relationships? How can we
Mm-hmm.
be, how can we communicate better about our values and things like that? And so the process of getting to the certification is really gratifying and really beneficial for us. We can't wait to have the B on our website. It represents something that I think is significant.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really enjoying sort of working through it because you can see what a powerful tool B
Mm-hmm.
Corp certification is. And even though the standards, are changing and the new standards come into effect next year, um, and we'll see sort of how that
Yeah.
works in practice then once we have the new standards being utilized. But that's, I think, the thing I'm most excited about. And it's also, we really want to demonstrate to our clients that we are truly in this. This is not window dressing for us to say we're mission driven. We believe in continuous improvement, which is what B Corp is all about.
Yep.
And we've already learned so much about how to become a better law firm and a better company through this process. And
Yeah.
and it's just a very gratifying thing to go through.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think because we started our companies about the same time, so I'm just currently in the process. I'm under review right now. We're under review right now for our B Corp assessment. And that's been a really just enlightening process too. It's like you go through the assessment and then you have someone look at it and be like,
Yeah.
I need this, this, and this, and this in order to verify this information. But such a gift to be born a B, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think it'd be so
Yes.
much harder if you retroactively. So I really like that setup, but I agree with you. It's designed to be aspirational, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think Dr. Bonner's, even though that now they've exited B Corp, they haven't recertified. They were like the highest score, right?
Yeah.
But everyone else is kind of, and they really worked hard at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Bonner's is, of course, a highly intentional company, but yeah, I think it's just a great exercise and to shape your thinking, right? Around, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. That is something I should pay attention to, right? All those little small and big details on how you run your business, even when you're a service business like we are, and you are. Being a product-based business with a complex supply chain, yikes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the cool things is, when we formed our company, we drafted, our benefit language into our partnership agreement, and that was a real process. We gave a lot of thought to that, and we talked to a lot of other companies and took a look at what other companies had said and how they define their purpose, and and part of this process for us with certifying has been looking back at what we said we intended to do, and then checking the receipts and saying, did we do this? How to what extent have we accomplished that? And that kind of self-critical evaluation process is really valuable. And one of the things that I realize is, when we started this firm, one of the core values that we wanted to pursue was being a resource for women entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses, and that we've very much done. In particular, my partner Julie has many women-owned business clients, and she's very very invested in some networks, and that's great. But another part of it was we wanted to be very involved with the local business community in Washington, in particular with the Black business community in Washington, and we haven't accomplished that. And so that's one thing where I said, actually, it's good for us to look back at this because we set out an aspiration for ourselves and we haven't achieved it. So what are we going to do about that? And so now we're working with our B Corp consultant to find partnerships with an HBCU in Virginia. We've been trying to get in with Howard, but Howard doesn't necessarily need our little help.
I'm sure, yeah.
They're the Mecca. So, but it's been helpful in that sense of saying, this is the what we set out to achieve. Have we done it? And if we haven't done it, how do we check ourselves on that and double down and see if we can find a way to accomplish that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's having practiced law for so long, it's a new world for me to get up in the morning and work with clients that I actually care about and that I want them to succeed because it's important to me that they succeed because what they're doing is important. It's just a totally different level of motivation and investment in the work and in the clients. And it's fun. It's extremely gratifying. It just doesn't feel like a job most days. And that's kind of incredible.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And that's why we love to start with that question about values. Every time I meet with somebody, and including you, in a business, this is a business meeting. I've never been in business meetings that start out with like, well, how did you get here? It's kind of like we're going to like AA or something. It's like, okay, so how did you stop the corporate world, right? Like, what was your breaking point, right? But those are always. I mean, it just feels so much more genuine when you're operating and working in a space that values your authenticity.
Yeah.
Right. That's what makes you great. Right. And that's where we find the common ground.
Yeah.
It's been super, super rewarding. And I agree with you. It's like the types of wins that I get, excuse me, the type of wins that I get from this business versus traditional sales roles that I've held.
Yeah.
Totally different. It's not about like meeting quota, right? It's like, oh, I met this person who taught me this or has this perspective or they had this to add that helps me navigate this space in a different or a more enlightened way. And those are the wins, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you were saying, like you didn't like find the answer with the city, right, that day, but your humanity grew. Right. Just through the nature of clients that you're working with. That is freaking awesome, man.
Right. Yeah. And it's just so interesting to me to do, for lack of a better word, business development in this space, because we don't pitch anymore. Yeah. We don't go out and chase deals. We're not kind of referral hunting. Every client that we get because we meet them on a human level and we have a conversation, and we either find that we're aligned and we have a rapport and we have a, inherent trust in each other. And if we do, then, a lot of times that turns into a client relationship. And it's such a new world for me because, having spent 25 years doing business development in, the big law way, where, it's cutthroat. It's cutthroat. It's about numbers. It has nothing to do with the person on the other side of the table whatsoever. No. And, it's so much fun to come to events like Mo or, Real Leaders or Champions Retreat and just be in the room with people, and you don't even pitch. You just have conversations and you just find people that are your people and you say, we should work together. And it's such a cool process. It's amazing.
Yeah. I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful message, Jim. So just to come back around, I know that we had spoken about, all of these different, groups that you advocate and support that are really, really incredible. But we also, invite our guests to use this platform to talk about a cause or a nonprofit that's really, really close to your heart. So if there's anything that you'd love to spotlight and share with our listeners, I would love for you to share, or Hannah and I would love for you to share.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to choose one because there's so many things that need fixing. And so, I donate to probably 10 different charities every month, and, from Human Rights Campaign to my local NPR station to, the Poor People's Campaign and Reverend Barber and Sustainable Economies Law Center. And there's just so many, there's so many important causes out there. But to me, as important as I think that is, and, supporting nonprofits and supporting these institutions, I honestly think that the work of building businesses in this space is the most valuable thing that we can do. I really think that, like I said, demonstrating the superiority of this economic model is more powerful than any contribution I could make to a nonprofit or any volunteer work I could do, because I think that, the things that are ailing our society, like inequality, which are, I think is a direct cause of political extremism, that only gets fixed by economic means. And so this movement as an economic movement, to me, is is the most important thing that I'm involved in. And I just hope the movement keeps growing and growing.
Wow. That is so cool. No one's given that answer. And I think it's, in reflection too, like where we are as a country with this administration, with all these services being government employees, losing their jobs, all this rollback, it will be the private markets.
Yeah.
It will be the private markets who step in. It will be the companies, the entrepreneurs, the innovators, the folks who keep showing up, right? Those who you're standing next to at your next protest. Next one is May Day, I think, for 5051. We are the ones we've been waiting for, right? So I love that answer. So I imagine, though, that would translate to, Jim, you do pro bono work. Would you also consider doing pro bono work for a small mission-driven entrepreneur?
Yeah, we do. We do that already.
Excellent.
So one of the things that we've started doing is partnering with business incubators. Green business incubators, or women entrepreneur incubators, or things like that, where we kind of do office hours and we offer, just sort of general corporate advice. How do you start a company? How do you choose a corporate form? How do you incorporate? How do you, raise some money? How do you hire people? Just the very basic nuts and bolts.
Cool.
So we do that already, and we plan to do that much more, because it's really a way. It's a way to kind of help people who are on the cusp of forming something that may be meaningful, and certainly will be meaningful for them, and maybe meaningful in a broader sense as well. But, in those early stages, most entrepreneurs just don't know how to handle the technical kind of challenges of starting a company. And ChatGPT can tell you some things, but the reality is, you really need good guidance early on. But you also can't afford to pay for a lawyer at that point. So that's something that we think is really important, is getting into those networks and partnering with. There's a green business incubator in the DC area we work with. There's one in Texas that we're going to be part of their August cohort, and just have office hours and advise their entrepreneurs there on sort of starting their businesses and getting set up properly. But I think that's that pro bono work. In addition to, and we do have individual companies that we advise pro bono.
Sure.
But finding those avenues to help entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs of color or other people who may not have traditionally had access to good, legal support or other support, that's really important to us.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, awesome, Jim. I know I've enjoyed having you on. Excellent conversation. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And it's been great talking to you both.
You're too good. You're too good. You're way too generous. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Caitlin.
Thanks again to Jim Black for joining us. As Jim reminds us, we're not waiting for permission. We're building the better way, one ethical exit at a time. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, I hope you share it with someone shaping the future of business with their values leading the way. See you next time on Ethical Exits.